Imagine opening your kitchen after 6 months. No refrigerator, no preservatives, no electricity, and the food is still perfectly edible. Not barely edible, not desperate food, but nourishing, safe, and strong enough to keep entire families alive through winters, wars, and famines. This wasn't fantasy. This was normal life for medieval people. While modern food expires in days, medieval foods were designed to survive months, sometimes years. And the most disturbing part isn't that they figured this out. It's that we intentionally abandoned these foods, even though many of them worked better than what we eat today. Medieval survival wasn't about convenience, it was about certainty. People lived with the constant knowledge that crops could fail, trade could stop, and winters could last longer than expected. Food wasn't something you bought weekly, it was something you engineered to outlast disaster. That mindset shaped what they ate, how they prepared it, and why spoilage was the enemy above all else. One of the most powerful examples was dried and fermented grain foods. Medieval bread wasn't the soft, airy product we know today. Much of it was dense, dark, and intentionally acidic. Rye-based black bread, sourdough loaves, and hardtack-like breads were baked to remove as much moisture as possible. Moisture is what feeds bacteria and mold. By reducing it and adding natural acidity through fermentation, medieval bread could last weeks without spoiling. In colder climates, loaves are sometimes stored for entire seasons. Modern bread goes stale in days because it is engineered for softness, speed, and profit, not survival. Fermentation was one of the medieval world's greatest weapons against decay. Long before bacteria were understood, people knew that certain processes made food safer over time, not worse. Sauerkraut, fermented turnips, sour grains, and pickled vegetables were staples across Europe. These foods didn't rot, they transformed. Lactic acid created an environment where dangerous microbes couldn't survive. Entire regions relied on fermented vegetables as winter vitamins, preventing scurvy and starvation when fresh food disappeared. Today, fermentation is treated as a niche health trend. In the Middle Ages, it was life insurance. Animal fat played a role modern diets are deeply uncomfortable with. Medieval people understood that fat was not just fuel, it was protection. Meat was often cooked, dried, or preserved and then sealed under thick layers of rendered fat. This method, later known as confit, created an oxygen barrier. Without oxygen, spoilage organisms couldn't grow. Properly prepared meat stored this way could last months, sometimes over a year, without refrigeration. Fat also provided dense calories essential for survival in cold climates. We abandoned this approach not because it failed, but because industrial food systems preferred lean cuts, fast spoilage, and repeat purchases. Cheese was another food designed to resist time. Medieval cheeses were not soft, fresh products meant for immediate consumption. They were aged, salted, and dried with purpose. Salt removed moisture. Aging increased acidity, and thick rinds protected the interior. Some hard cheeses could survive long journeys, military campaigns, and harsh winters without refrigeration. Cheese was portable nutrition. Protein, fat, minerals locked into a stable form. Modern refrigeration made such durability unnecessary, and mass production favored faster, milder cheeses with shorter shelf lives. Smoked foods were everywhere in the medieval diet, not for flavor, but for survival. Smoke deposits antimicrobial compounds on food surfaces while slowly drying them. Fish, meat, even some cheeses were smoked repeatedly over weeks. This combination drastically slowed bacterial growth. In coastal and river regions, smoked fish became a backbone of urban survival, feeding cities when fresh supplies failed. Today, smoking is mostly aesthetic, stripped of its original preservation purpose. Honey deserves special attention because it is one of the few foods on Earth that literally never spoils. Archaeologists have found edible honey in ancient tombs. Medieval people knew this without science. Honey wasn't just a sweetener, it was a preservative, a medicine, and an emergency energy source. Fruits, nuts, and even meats were sometimes stored in honey to extend their life. We replaced honey with refined sugar, which provides calories but none of honey's antimicrobial protection. Even water-rich foods were managed carefully. Root cellars stored turnips, carrots, and beets in cool, stable underground environments where temperature and humidity stayed nearly constant year-round. These vegetables didn't rot because they weren't shocked by warmth, light, or dryness. Modern homes lack such spaces because supermarkets replaced storage knowledge. We no longer design houses for food survival, only for convenience. So why did we abandon these foods if they worked so well? The answer is not health. It's speed, profit, and control. Industrial food systems depend on rapid turnover. Short shelf life means repeat purchases. Refrigeration and chemical preservation replaced ancient methods because they centralized food production. Knowledge moved from households to factories. Skills became dependencies. The medieval goal was resilience. The modern goal is efficiency. There's also a psychological shift. Medieval people expected scarcity. Modern society assumes constant abundance. Foods designed to last years feel unnecessary, even strange, until systems fail. Only then do we rediscover methods our ancestors never forgot. What's most ironic is that many of these medieval foods are now returning under new names. Fermented foods for gut health, sourdough for digestion, aged cheeses for nutrition, preserved meats for tradition. We didn't abandon them because they were bad. We abandoned them because we forgot why they existed. And as modern supply chains grow more fragile, climate more unpredictable, and food waste more extreme, the medieval question returns, quietly but urgently. What if food wasn't meant to expire quickly at all? The disappearance of these foods wasn't sudden. It happened quietly, generation by generation, as knowledge stopped being passed down and was replaced by systems that promised safety without skill. Medieval households were not just consumers of food, they were managers of time. Every preservation method was designed around one question: how long can this keep us alive if everything else fails? Modern food culture rarely asks that question anymore. Take dried foods, for example. Drying was not primitive guesswork, it was controlled science without equations. Medieval people dried grains, fruits, mushrooms, herbs, and meats until microbial life simply had no environment to exist. Properly dried foods could last years if kept away from moisture. Dried peas, lentils, beans, and grains were the backbone of medieval survival during sieges and winters. Soldiers marched with dried food because it didn't betray them by rotting. Today, dehydration exists, but mostly as snacks or emergency rations, not as a core food system. We replaced durability with softness, texture, and instant gratification. Then there was salt, one of the most powerful preservation tools in human history. Medieval salt wasn't just seasoning, it was strategic infrastructure. Entire economies revolved around salt routes because salt could pull moisture out of food, making spoilage nearly impossible. Salted fish, salted meat, and salted vegetables fed cities far from farms. In many regions, salt taxes funded kingdoms because salt meant survival. Modern nutrition demonized salt without context, ignoring that medieval diets balanced it with physical labor and low sugar intake. What we lost wasn't just salted food, it was understanding how and when salt keeps food alive instead of killing it. Another abandoned system was layered preservation. Medieval people rarely relied on one method alone. Food was dried, then smoked, then salted, then stored in cool environments. Each layer reduced risk. If one barrier failed, another held. Modern food relies heavily on refrigeration as a single point of failure. When power stops, food dies quickly. Medieval food systems were designed with redundancy because failure was expected, not surprising. Alcoholic fermentation also played a role modern discussions often ignore. Weak beers, meads, and fermented drinks were not about intoxication, they were about safety. Fermentation killed pathogens in water and grains, creating liquid calories that wouldn't rot. In many regions, lightly fermented drinks were safer than raw water. These beverages provided energy, nutrients, and hydration without spoilage. Today, we separate food and drink, forgetting that medieval people often combined both to survive. Perhaps the most uncomfortable truth is this: medieval foods didn't spoil because they weren't designed to be pleasurable first. They were designed to be reliable. Taste mattered, but survival mattered more. Modern food flips that priority. We design for craving, speed, and visual appeal, then patch the consequences with preservatives, refrigeration, and waste.
This shift changed behavior. Medieval people ate seasonally, slowly, and predictably. Their gut microbiomes adapted to fermented, aged, and fiber-rich foods. Modern diets rotate rapidly, overwhelm digestion with sugar and refined flour, and rely on cold storage instead of biological stability. When medieval food spoiled, it was obvious. When modern food fails, it often does so invisibly. What makes this abandonment tragic is that many of these foods don't require advanced technology to return. They require patience, space, and knowledge, three things modern systems quietly removed. Root cellars disappeared when houses shrank. Fermentation disappeared when time became expensive. Preservation disappeared when shopping replaced storing. Yet history shows something important. Every time societies face instability, these foods come back. During wars, depressions, and supply crises, people rediscovered drying, fermenting, salting, and storing. Not because they are nostalgic, but because they work when nothing else does. The medieval world didn't preserve food because it lacked technology. It preserved food because it understood reality. Spoilage wasn't an inconvenience, it was a threat. And the foods that never spoiled weren't accidents, they were deliberate answers to a harsh world. The real question isn't why medieval foods lasted so long. It's why a civilization that knows this history still chooses food designed to fail quickly. Consider black bread, often dismissed today as poor people's food. In medieval Europe, especially in colder and wetter regions, black bread made from rye, barley, or mixed grains was not a downgrade, it was a survival upgrade. Rye thrives in soils and climates where wheat fails. It resists cold, grows faster, and produces grain even in bad years. But the real secret was how black bread was made. The dough was fermented for long periods, sometimes days, creating a highly acidic environment. That acidity slowed mold growth dramatically. The bread was baked dense and heavy, driving out moisture. Once cooled, it could be stored in dry, ventilated spaces and eaten weeks later. Modern bread molds quickly because it is engineered to be soft, neutral in pH, and moisture-rich, perfect conditions for spoilage. Yet black bread had a darker side that history doesn't hide. When rye crops were infected with ergot fungus, the bread could cause hallucinations, convulsions, and death. Medieval people didn't understand fungi, but they noticed patterns. They learned which harvests were dangerous, which regions were affected, and how to reduce risk through fermentation and blending grains. Even here, knowledge evolved through survival. We didn't abandon black bread because it was unsafe. We abandoned it because industrial agriculture demanded uniformity, speed, and visual perfection. Then there was salted fish, one of the most reliable foods in medieval history. Coastal societies perfected salting techniques that allowed fish to be transported hundreds of miles inland without rotting. Salt pulled water from the flesh, creating an environment where bacteria could not survive. In many regions, salted fish fed cities during winter and famine. It became so central that entire trade networks depended on it. Modern refrigeration made this knowledge unnecessary, but also fragile. When refrigeration fails, salted fish still works. That truth hasn't changed, only our dependence has. Fermented vegetables were another killer of non-spoiling food. Cabbage became sauerkraut, turnips were fermented, even onions and garlic were preserved in brine. These foods didn't just last, they improved. Fermentation increased vitamin availability, especially vitamin C, preventing diseases like scurvy. Medieval people didn't know the chemistry, but they knew the outcome. People who ate fermented foods survived winters better. Today, these foods return as probiotics, stripped of their survival context and sold as health trends rather than necessities. Animal fat preservation remains one of the most misunderstood medieval practices. Rendered fat was not just cooking material, it was a sealing technology.
Cooked meat submerged in fat was protected from air and moisture. Without oxygen, bacteria spoilage could not grow. This method allowed meat to last months without refrigeration. It was used by peasants and armies alike. Modern diets fear fat, yet replace it with preservatives and plastics. The medieval system used biology instead of chemicals, and it worked. Even honey, often romanticized, was treated practically. Its low water content and natural antibacterial properties made it one of the safest storage mediums available. Honey didn't spoil because it didn't allow microbes to live. Medieval people stored fruits, nuts, and medicinal herbs in honey not for flavor, but because it was reliable. Sugar replaced honey because it was cheaper to mass produce, not because it was better. What ties all these foods together is one brutal truth. They were designed for a world where failure was expected. Crops failed, winters killed, wars stopped trade. Medieval food wasn't about abundance, it was about continuity. Every method reduced dependence on timing, luck, and systems outside the household. Modern food abandoned these methods because centralized systems don't benefit from durability. Food that lasts years doesn't sell weekly. Skills that empower households weaken dependence on markets. Preservation knowledge moved from kitchens to corporations and then quietly disappeared from memory. But history shows a pattern that repeats without mercy. Whenever modern systems strain during wars, economic crashes, or supply chain breakdowns, people rediscover these foods. Drying returns, fermentation returns, long-lasting staples return, not because they are nostalgic, but because they are resilient. Medieval foods that never spoiled were never mistakes of the past. They were answers to reality. We didn't outgrow them. We simply chose convenience over preparedness and forgot what that choice cost.